Um, Mrs. Wachowski just recently completed judging the financial literacy paper event at um, ICDC in Orlando, Florida, and she is going to share with us her experiences as a judge at Nationals.
I learned a lot about the competition and the preparation of the contestants through judging. It was a really great experience. The beginning was grading the papers. What I discovered with the papers was the papers that looked really professional, very crisp, with pictures and graphs that helped to explain the content were easier for me to read. And I also found that the papers that were organized exactly in the order of the evaluation sheet were also easier for me to read. If they were easier for me to read, I understood them better and I could flow through the content more easily. Some of the papers had typos, they had grammatical errors, etc. And that really put a bad face on the content. It was hard to get through content if I saw mistakes, and it was hard to be motivated to continue on further in the paper if there were errors like that. And those are really simple things to address, to take care of, certainly before it goes to a competitive level.
Ms. Wachowski, do you remember how much weight the paper had in your overall evaluation of
Yes, it was 60%.
the paper was 60%.
Yes, and I was the second judge to look at the paper. The judge the day before looked at the paper strictly on mechanics. So there was someone who graded the paper according to um, style, grammar, etc. So there would be deductions made on day one. Then when it came to me, my job was content. However, errors um, would get in the way of the flow of the paper. And I guess then that's a second ding on content or a second ding on the paper if there were mechanical errors in it also.
Um, how important was the executive summary in your evaluation of the paper?
I used the executive summary probably 3 times through. Um, Once to get a sense of what the paper was about. The second time, comparing the content of the executive summary to the content of the paper to make sure there was a connection. And then the third time through, I needed that executive summary to read again just before the team came to me, so I had a good idea of which project it was that I was looking at. If the executive summary was very succinct, it answered the questions that were in the particular area. Again, it made it easier for me to get through the content. Some of the executive summaries were distractions. They were introductions as opposed to summaries. So it's important to make sure that the preparation of the executive summary is really a great recap of a well-written paper.
Um, when in the supplementary sections of the paper, like appendices and bibliographies, did you spend much time evaluating those, or how did those fit into your evaluation?
I looked at the bibliography. I checked number of sources, and I looked for the reliability of the sources. I wanted to see where the students had gotten their information and if the information was truly important. So I looked at that. I also looked at the appendices because often the materials would add clarity to the project, help me to understand better what the activities were that the students had been involved in over the course of the preparation of the paper. So that was very helpful. Most important, though, was how well the paper itself was written.
Um, So moving on to the presentation phase,
Yes.
uh, were there any particular presentations that stood out in your mind as being exceptionally good, or exceptionally, or just weaker presentations?
I have to tell you that the best presentation that I saw was phenomenal because of the preparation of the students. Uh, they used just poster boards. They had 6 poster boards. The poster boards were lovely, but it wasn't a high-tech presentation. What was phenomenal was the student preparation. A team of 3 students. They had memorized their bit, and it was almost as though a play was going on. They were so polished. Um, they would pass the dialogue from one to another. They had great gestures. It was really well done. No note cards, no script. They just knew it. And as I say, it was very much like it was a play. They had learned their bits, and they were able to perform in front of me. And again, it followed the sequence of the evaluation sheet, so it was easy for me as a judge to keep track, making sure that they had addressed all of the criteria along the way.
If you looked at the weaker presentations, what do you recall that they were missing, or other areas that they could have improved on?
I can recall 2 week presentations. Both of them sat at the table as opposed to standing and presenting to me. Uh, One of them had a PowerPoint that was on an iPad, which could have been great, but the iPad wasn't used as a good presentation tool. It was flat, and the student had to keep touching through it as opposed to clicking and having it on a screen to look at. I also found that that particular team ad-libbed a lot. They would look at the points on the screen and actually look at the screen rather than looking at me, and then they would embellish the points and go off on tangent stories. So it would spiral, and it was hard for me to keep track, making sure that they had indeed thoroughly completed the content that was required. All right, another one that I recall was very low in content. Again, the presenter just sat at the table, no materials, not a flip chart, not a poster, not a PowerPoint presentation, nothing. Just sat down at the table and chatted with me. That was a long 10 minutes, as opposed to the group that was really well prepared, like a play. That one went by very quickly. I couldn't believe that the 10 minutes were over.
The people that used laptops, did they all have clickers, or were they using the keypad to move their presentations forward?
The students who had clickers moved through the presentation with greater fluency than the students who were trying to use the keypad. I found with the keypad, one particular group, because they were standing backwards to the screen so that I could see it, they would sometimes make the slides go backwards instead of forward. And when you want to be fluent in what's going on, it's important to make sure that the technology flows with the presentation.
Right.
So yes, the clicker made a difference.
Clicker made a difference. In your mind, if as you recall your ranking of the presentations, did the presentations that had additional, let's say, lack of a better term, props, boards, any other items to enhance their presentation other than the laptop itself, did those tend to finish better
Absolutely.
in your ratings?
Absolutely. There were groups who brought along um, the handouts that they might have used, the giveaways that they might have used at events that they were involved in. if they were professionally done, and they coordinated exactly with what they were talking about. That was very helpful. Um, I think that there was a particular group who had handouts that they had used, but they didn't give them to me at the time they were talking about what it was they were doing. It was a distraction then to get it at a different time.
Right.
So what would have been great is if they had said, when we were at the grocery store, passing out flyers, this is what went on, this is the flyer that we passed out. That would have been helpful, but to get those things afterwards, it was a distraction then.
Um, you had mentioned this offline, where whenever there was a lot of numbers involved, it helped you if the students had summarized those in a nice chart format as opposed to having a bunch of numbers for you to look at.
Absolutely. The contest that I evaluated had an evaluation portion in it. Those students who had a pre-survey and a post-survey, and they displayed their data in a graph or a pie chart, it made a huge difference in my understanding of their accomplishments. It was good for me, as the judge I am, or I was, to be able to see it very concretely, very clearly, and to be able to see the growth that was made as a result of the project. So that was very helpful to me. Data that I found that was irrelevant would have been background kind of data from other sources. That to me didn't make a lot of sense, but data that was tied in to the findings, results of the students' projects, the student data that was generated by the students made a difference to me.
Okay. Anything else that you'd like to mention?
Yes, I'd like to talk about the professional appearance of the contestants. I found that there were several teams that looked outstanding. Their attire enhanced their presentations. Very professional looking, gentlemen with ties, the girls with the DECA scarves. Granted, they are not apparel that you would wear in another setting, only appropriate for this event, but it was a great enhancement. I also found that if trousers, slacks, etc. were professional looking, it enhanced the appearance. A couple of the contestants were dressed looking nice, but not looking like business professionals, and it was a distraction to the event. So yes, the appearance of the team made a difference. Adding to it by looking professional, distracting by not being as professional in attire. The DECA blazer is great, but it's not enough to tie the whole team together.
Could I ask you anything that particularly impressed you when the team would come in and introduce themselves? Was there some teams that seemed to have a very confident approach to you, and what exactly in those teams, what did they do?
Yes, the confident teams who would walk straight up to me, ready to shake my hand. Hello, I am so-and-so, and this is, then they would introduce the other teammates. They made a big difference. Also, those students who would remain standing when they approached, rather than just coming up to the table and sitting down. That made a big difference too.
Going to the end of the presentation, was there anything in particular that seemed impressive to you when a particular group would close their presentation? Did the presentation tend to come to a crescendo, or was there something they did that enhanced what the presentation?
There were two groups who had real clear conclusions. One of them had a real creative conclusion. It was kind of a poetic rap. They didn't sing anything, but they absolutely went through all of the steps of their presentation from beginning to end. It was a wrap-up conclusion, but they did it in a really creative way. They were very, very fast-paced, and it was really interesting. Focused on content, but they drew me into what they were doing because it was so creative and high energy. And another group was very businesslike in their conclusion, but again, it was a conclusion. It wrapped up all of the bits of the presentation. Just like in writing a great essay, when you have a great final paragraph that restates, refreshes the memory, this conclusion was like that also.
Well, Ms. Wachowski, I appreciate.
I've got more to say.
Oh, cool. Okay. Please do.
In the question and answer session, I really liked it when teammates would allow their other teammates to finish and answer before they added to it, rather than trying to jump in and add to it as someone was going on. I found that very respectful. I liked it when I would ask a question and more than one teammate would answer the question. I liked it when their answers tied into their project and went beyond the project, maybe mentioning something they had learned in research or added to it by embellishing on an experience or an example that came through the project. So the question, oh yes, it was 40% of the presentation evaluation was on how the students answered the questions.
And you had 3 questions, is that correct?
A minimum of 3
3
questions.
Okay.
Yes.
And were those questions that you asked, were those questions that were part of the rubric, specifically saying please ask those questions, or were those questions that you had the option of asking on your own?
They were very much a part of the rubric. It's apparent what the students will be asked during the interview section of the competition. The final question was specific to each of the individual presentations, but there was an overarching theme to that question, so it was parallel to what every other team was asked. Very evident, though, in looking at the rubric, what the questions would be, so the students could prepare answers for that.
Was there, when you asked questions, was there any particular length of time in the answer that you found, met your expectations, that someone didn't go too long or too short? Was there a particular amount of time that you expected the student to speak?
Right, medium length answers were absolutely the most appropriate. Short answers that were just a couple of words or maybe a sentence wouldn't be satisfying, and neither would be a long rambling answer. Right, but I also paid attention to whether or not the answers were linked to content and not just a response, talking. Some of the responses were filling time rather than letting me know that they could answer the questions that I was asking.
Okay. Anything else?
That's all.
Okay, well, thank you, Ms. Wachowski. This
My
is going to be
pleasure.
very helpful for our students.
My pleasure.